What powers does the government now have that it didn't have 10 years ago?
Well, they have the power now to revoke all of our constitutional rights. So, and that sounds like hyperbole, but think about it. They figured out, the most important right is freedom of speech. And Hamilton, Madison, and Adams said, we put that in the First Amendment, freedom of expression, because all the other rights are dependent on it. And I've said this to you before, Tucker, that any government that has the power to silence its critics has license for any atrocity. And they knew that. So they put it first, and we saw this dynamic during COVID. As soon as they realized that they could silence us, they could censor doctors, they could censor scientists, they could censor individuals who were injured, they could stop them from talking about their injuries, they could stop parents from talking about their children's injuries. They did all these things to us, and we put up with it. And the press went along with it, very shamefully. They became vehicles, stenographers for government propaganda. And we all went along with it. And then what did they do? They immediately went after the other leg of the First Amendment, was freedom of religion. They closed every church in this country for a year. Can you imagine if somebody told you 5 years ago the government's going to close every church in this country? You would say there's no way that that's going to happen, and yet it happened. And they went after the third leg of the First Amendment, which is freedom of assembly, with these social distancing mandates that had no scientific basis. And they went after the Fifth Amendment, which is property rights. They shut down 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation, no public hearing, no environmental impact statement, no notice and comment rulemaking. All of the procedures that guarantee democracy in the regulatory process were abandoned. And you just had one guy, a 50-year bureaucrat who's never been elected to anything, who says, shut down all your businesses. Shut down the small businesses, but keep Target and Walmart open. And shut down the churches, but keep the liquor stores open. And keep Facebook and all the people who are cooperating with the government, Facebook, Instagram, Google, and who are censoring speech for us, keep all them open. And shut down all the little guys, and destroy our communities. We put up with it. Then they got rid of jury trials. The Seventh Amendment says, no American shall be denied the right of a trial before a jury of his peers in case of controversies exceeding $25 in value. Well, there's no pandemic exception. There's no epidemic exception. And yet they said, shut down any corporation, any hospital, any doctor who injured you negligently, recklessly, who was involved in applying a countermeasure cannot be sued, no matter how grievous their behavior, no matter how egregious your injury. And for the first time, so these are all, and then the Fourth Amendment guarantees against illegal searches and seizures, was all completely abandoned with these track and trace surveillance measures that we were all subjected to, where you had to give your medical records before you leave your home. So virtually all of the rights in the Constitution, except the Second Amendment, and probably because there is a Second Amendment. That was the only one they didn't mess with. But all the other ones they got rid of. So if you're asking, what's changed, that's what's changed now. They said to us, oh, we're going to give all those back to you, and they did. So today we have those back, but they've established this very, very dangerous precedent where if there's another emergency and, they can cook up a pandemic anytime they want. That's what gain of function is all about. And anytime if there's the monkeypox pandemic or the dengue pandemic or the Ebola pandemic that are all in the pipeline, when those happen, we again are going to be asked to abandon all of our rights, and most people are going to put up with it. And yeah, not all people.
So what happens when there is the next emergency, and maybe it's not, maybe it's a war?
Maybe it's a war. Maybe it's an economic collapse.
Well, that's right. So how do we respond when we're told to abandon the Bill of Rights, our birthright? How do we respond?
As I said, we resist. The Constitution was written for hard times. It wasn't written for easy times. It was written for hard times. And you know, and I've said this to you before, Tucker, that during the American Revolution, there were two large epidemics. One of them, a malaria epidemic that decimated the armies of Virginia, and then there was a smallpox epidemic that decimated the Army of New England at the very time that Benedict Arnold, who was our greatest general, our greatest military strategist during the war, had captured the city of Montreal and captured Canada. And because of the smallpox epidemic and the American troops, he didn't have the manpower to hold the city and had to withdraw. Otherwise, Canada today would be part of the United States. And the framers of the Constitution knew that. And between the end of the Revolution and 1792, when we ratified the Bill of Rights, through that 10-year period, there were epidemics in every city in our country: malaria epidemic, smallpox, yellow fever, cholera, typhus, typhoid, that killed tens of thousands of people, decimated population. All of the framers knew about that, but they did not put an epidemic exception in the United States Constitution. And during the Civil War, the Confederates were sending agents provocateurs northward into U.S. cities to drum up draft riots. And those draft riots were threatening the entire structure of Union society and the military efforts. And Abraham Lincoln, in an effort to avert any more draft riots, began arresting these Confederate agent provocateurs when they came into the northern cities, before they did anything wrong. That was a violation of habeas corpus. But he said, we've got to do it because it's vital for the life of our nation. At that time, over 600,000 Americans had died in the Civil War. And it's the equivalent of 12 to 15 million people dying today. And our country was being torn apart, and we didn't know if it was going to survive. So the life of the nation was at stake. And that case, that his habeas corpus declaration was challenged in the Supreme Court. And Justice Roger Taney said, you can't do it, even if the life of the nation is at stake. Even if tens of thousands of lives are at stake, you can't do it. It's the Constitution. It was written for hard times. There is no circumstance in which it can be waived. And I think that we all have to remember that.